right, good afternoon, everyone. Hope you're having a good time at Google Cloud Next. And thank you for spending the next 45 minutes with us. Today, we are going to take some time to talk about Gemini CLI and supercharging it into the tool to rule them all. Our goal here is to show how you can take a common workflow or journey with Gemini CLI, use the various extensibility surfaces it provides, and customize it for your developer needs. And to take it a step further, how you can share it with your friends, colleagues, teams, and community at large. I'm Aishanee Shah. I'm a software engineer at Google, and I work on Gemini CLI intelligence and quality. And I'm glad to be presenting today with my coworker, colleague, Abhi.
Hey, everyone. My name is Abhi. I also am a software engineer at Google. I work on Gemini CLI, and I've been here since kind of its early days, back when it was just a private repo that we had internally that we worked on. So I've been kind of all over the place. I've worked on the UI pieces for the TUI and all the way down to subagents, hooks, commands, all of these fun things. So I really today focus mostly on the agent orchestrator and the architecture for that. And so, yeah. So let's get into it. Has anyone in the room used a CLI agent? Anyone, show of hands if you've used a CLI agent? It could be Codex, Cloud Code, awesome, that's a lot of hands. How about just generally any sort of AI product? It could be AI Studio, Gemini Web, any of those. Yeah. So, take a step back and think about the rapid development of AI tooling. It's been crazy over the past few years. We've gone from these models that have developed, gotten really good at coding, exploration, and research. And there's so many tools. I just listed off like 10 of them. But there's less connection points. And so we've kind of approached this idea where we're the messenger pigeons. Especially early on, we were chatting in tabs, copying and pasting things, really acting as the bridge to all of these toolings. For me, I worked in Chrome just a little over a year ago, and this was something painfully obvious to me. The models have gotten really good at exploring stack traces and errors, and for me, a lot of my time was spent copying and pasting that into a Gemini web chat, getting the result back, acting on it in my IDE. And so this is the pain point that we're going through right now. And the result from that, as you can see, are these three topics that I'm going to kind of dig into today. One is the tech islands. And what I mean by this is that all the tools that I mentioned, the web apps, the IDEs, the CLI tools. And so you have all these different pieces, and how do you use them effectively together? And there's also a lot of cognitive overload. And so this is, how do you make sure you're structuring your prompts right? How do you make sure you have the right context? And finally, reinventing the wheel. A lot of my coworkers will share with me, hey, I have the perfect prompt. It's structured like this. I have a persona, I have context, and a question. And we've all done this in multiple teams, different ways. And so how do we share that knowledge? Because it's not just about doing it yourself. It's how do you share it and get that multiplier all across your team and company. And so this is where we talk about the orchestration piece. Because for us, as the human in the loop, our time is the most precious thing. And if we're acting as messenger pigeons, we're really not getting the most out of our tooling. And so for this, we need some kind of orchestrator, a place where multiple things come together and communicate, and so you're avoiding that copy-paste nightmare. So I'm going to hand it back over to Aishanee to kind of talk a little bit more about how Gemini CLI helps solve that problem.
All right, thanks, Abhi. So what is Gemini CLI? Gemini CLI is an AI agent, open source AI agent, providing lightweight direct access to best-in-class Gemini models, connections to all your favorite tools, and the ability to gather and maintain the context to make it all work towards a goal which you specify right in your terminal. No matter the use case, this is your tool with endless possibilities, an agentic collaborator, an intelligent orchestrator, and above all, a doer with infinite ability to learn, retrieve, and execute. Imagine your smartest hire. Except, unlike human, without all of this, without getting frustrated, tired, or annoyed, for the most part anyway. Now, let's talk about the extensibility story. This hire comes with a great foundation. built-in tools for file operations like read, write, edit, grep, glob, the ability to search and fetch from the web, shell execution, and much more. This provides a great and powerful starting point. But the focus of the talk today is to augment this agent, Gemini CLI, to make it work for your workflow in your code base and with your team. We are going to discuss various ways to make Gemini CLI relevant for you. Now, you can add skills, connect to existing MCP servers, or create new MCP servers to access external information and services. Setting up hooks so that you can trigger specific actions at specific times that matter to you. And utilizing subagents to parallelize tasks while isolating context and thereby conserving the context of the main agent. There is a lot you can do here. And honestly, in 2026, as developers, this is where we spend most of our time, perfecting our own customizations and creating meta workflows, all with an objective to be more efficient and stay out of the loop as much as possible with these agentic tools and stay less hands-on. Now, the last part, but not the least, is about the community. Sharing your customizations, incorporating the established best practices from experts and industry, and iterating to improve collectively via extensions. This is a great way to distribute knowledge and break down the silos that Abhi just talked about. Now, we are going to walk through some of these options with a demo. And this is what the roadmap of the demo looks like. And we're going to help my friend here who goes by the name John, and he's really excited to use and learn more about Gemini CLI. But as a developer, he wants to familiarize himself with the code base and the architecture and other technical details to get up to speed. So we're going to follow John along on his journey and demonstrate how you can supercharge Gemini CLI to truly make it the tool to rule them all. Now, let's start with the foundation. OK, so we're going to jump right in with John. He has just cloned Gemini CLI repo. It's an open source project, so he's been exploring the code base and realizes that subagents is a big part of Gemini CLI and how he can use it. He's interested in knowing more about how subagent delegation works. So, like all of us at Gemini CLI team and all the Gemini CLI users, he uses Gemini CLI to understand details of Gemini CLI. So we're going to follow along this demo. What he has done is he's gone into terminal, launched Gemini CLI within the directory where Gemini CLI code base lives. And he's asking the question that he has. Hey, I want to understand how subagent delegation works. So let's see. Here, this is a natural language query. Anyone who is familiar with these agents, this is how we're asking it without being very specific because we rely on the agent to figure out what it needs to figure out to answer the question. All right, so let's see. Now, this is where this is the Gemini CLI in thinking mode. This is where the magic happens. So with the built-in tools that Gemini CLI already has, it figures out what files it needs to read in order to answer the question. And this is kind of progressively going in a way where the agent reads one file and figures out, OK, I have this piece of information. I need the next piece, and then continues it until it gets all the answer. And at the end of it, that's where, if the goal is accomplished, it will end with that answer. Here you see that Gemini CLI has just provided a summary in Markdown format to explain how subagent delegation works. But John prefers to, John is a visual learner, and so am I. So he's going to ask Gemini CLI to instead convert this into a flowchart. Now, by reading all these files, Gemini CLI has gathered enough context about this specific piece, so it converts that context. It's reusing the context that it has already gathered and converts it into the flowchart. So here we will see flowchart inside the terminal right there. Now, this is great. John was able to get the answer and get some understanding about how this piece of architecture is designed. So let's continue. Going back to our roadmap, We are checking the first box, which is just using the built-in tools, how to explore the code base. Now, this is a great starting point, and for a one-off exploration or a quick glance at different things. But what if John wants to share this diagram with his teammates or put it in a design doc? Now, can he teach CLI to instead generate a diagram that is shareable? Now, John can go back to his terminal and write exact instructions so that the Gemini CLI can generate the diagram. He has used Mermaid diagramming tool in past, so he can specify everything he wants there. But wouldn't it be better if John can specify all these instructions one time, and then Gemini CLI can do it anytime he wants for different pieces of the code base? So this is where we get to our step 2 of the demo, which is bundling expertise into a packaged agent skill. Now let's understand what it is and how it works. What are agent skills? Modular, self-contained packages designed to extend the agent's ability with specialized knowledge, procedural workflow, and bundled resources. In simple words, this is our expert onboarding guide for the smart hire that we have. Now, we will get to the technical anatomy of a skill in just a moment, but let's spend a little bit of time understanding why and how skills can be useful. So when you are adding skills, by adding skills, you're giving your agent a catalog of expertise it has access to without polluting the context with too much detail at first. So the agent can discover and use a specific expertise by pulling in that expertise just in time, right when it's about to use it. And this unlocks a massive value for context preservation and by that context management, because it only carries the weight of the expertise when it's actually using it. And of course, if you want, you can always invoke it on demand by invoking the skill directly. Now, additionally, the other thing it does is it allows you to bundle automatable and validation kind of scripts and your optimized workflows that you've already perfected outside of this specific session. So you get deterministic reliability and data groundedness for already perfected tasks. So you are, instead of asking your agent to figure out things that you figured out, you are basically stopping to spend the tokens for that thing. You are going to build it once, bundle it, and then reuse it. So let's look at what agent skills look like. And as you can see, it's incredibly simple. On the left, you can see the directory structure. And here, the main core instructions are in the skill.md file, which is the core required file for a skills directory. The other two subfolders are optional subfolders where you can provide references and scripts that the main agent can load and execute when if needed. On the right side, let's look at the skill.md file. This file contains all the information for your agent to both invoke and utilize the skill effectively. So on the top here, you have the YAML front matter, which has metadata for name and description. Inside the description, this is where you have high signal, succinct description of what the skill does, and just as importantly, when Gemini CLI or when the agent should invoke it. Going back to our metaphor for the catalog, this is the information that agent has when it's trying to decide which skill to launch or which skill to use. So this is how it decides. Inside the markdown format, you have all the instruction that are loaded into the context when the skill is in use. So these instructions guide the agent's behavior when the skill is active. Now let's go back to John. Behind the scenes, he has already created the skill for the Mermaid diagramming tool, and he is going to now try to use that. So we are back in the session, and the first thing he will do is to reload the skills. This is to make sure that the agent can discover the skills if there are new skills inside the .gemini folder. And after that, he's just going to ask the agent to create the Mermaid diagram. Now, because this is an existing session from the previous conversation, agent already had all the context about what the content of the diagram. But now it's putting this skill into action. So first thing it does is agent checks, oh, in the catalog I have this skill that is exactly relevant to the ask. Let me activate that. And once the user approves that, skill gets into action. And here's where agent reads all the information that is provided inside the skill, and it's going to eventually create an MMD file with the right diagram. Now the fun part, sorry, I can play the demo again, but all right. The fun part here is the skill doesn't just contain information about creating the diagram, but it also has packaged validation scripts and conversion scripts. So instead of stopping at creation of MMD file, it's also going to convert it into PNG. And not just conversion, it's also going to validate that that PNG is actually valid. So at the end of this demo, John has both MMD file and PNG file that he can share with his team. All right, I'm going to continue since we played this already. But let's look at what the skill looks like. Sorry, what the PNG that was generated looks like. We are not going to get into how subagent delegation works here, but this is the final diagram that it came up with. And you're more than welcome to look at our code base and look at how subagent delegation works on GitHub. But the idea is agent used all the context it had gathered along with this skill to create this diagram that's pretty, that's shareable, and that does exactly what John needed it to do. Now, it's not some hallucinated graphic. It's actually detailed based on the context that was gathered prior. And now that John's pretty happy, we have step 2 checked here, which is we bundled expertise into a packaged agent skill. Now, as our workflows get longer or larger and we have more complex tasks, we kind of get into a world where a lot of these the skills are not sufficient. How? Whenever we are invoking skills, the way that that works is all the information from the skill.md and other potential reference files are inserted into main agent's context. And you can imagine, as you have more and more complex tasks inside main agent's workflow, the context of main agent kind of gets overloaded with very specific disparate blobs of information. And this can, right now, this can overload the main agent. So over a longer course or longer session for John, for example, if he's exploring different parts of the code base, the explicit details around how to create mermaid diagram or how to validate it, they are kind of less important, and they introduce unnecessary details that can potentially derail the actual main agent's directive. So for that, we are going to look at isolating this expertise. And I will pass it back to Abhi to explain how subagents can be useful in that.
Thank you. Awesome. Thank you, Aishanee. Cool. So a lot of folks raised their hand for using Codex and Cloud Code and Gemini CLI before. How many of you have heard of subagents as a term before? Yeah, a lot of hands. Subagents have become really popular. And like Aishanee said, one of the big use cases for them is their ability to isolate not only context, but also tool selections. It lets you create a specialized agent, something that can complete a task and come back to the main agent. So why is this important? Well, when you're refactoring a large code base or doing multiple steps to solve a problem, you don't want to have to switch sessions every time you finish a task. The mermaid diagram was created, but now we want to use it to create a design. That was just the first step of the process. And like Aishanee said, the skills and the scripts, and maybe even the failures from those skill validation pieces are now a part of your history, but they're not always helpful. And so this is where we move away from the idea of, what's it called? Augmentation to delegation. And so that's what we're going to talk about here today. So what makes a subagent special? There's a few pieces. 1, the tools, and 2, the persona. And so we actually explored this in the code base as a built-in piece. We offer subagents today, and for example, the first one we explored was called the Codebase Investigator. And the reason for this was just the natural organic progression when we were finding new features or building them, and the first step always involved a long-winded exploration. Some of these explorations consumed massive amounts of tokens to really get a good graph out of it. And so by isolating that piece into an agent and having that agent really hand off only the most high-value information, we come back with the exact pieces we need while keeping our main agent session clean. So we have built-in agents today, but we also offer custom agents. And that's what this talk is about, extensibility. How do you superpower your own journey? And so we offer two types of subagents today. There's the local ones. These are the ones that use the foundational tools that we talked about earlier. The same reads, the same skills, the same grep. But we also offer remote subagents. These are your A-to-A agents that you already have. You can use those to supercharge your workflow to connect to all the agents you have in the cloud and beyond. So let's take a deeper look into how these subagents look. So as you can see, again, like agent skills, pretty simple. First off, on the left side, you can kind of see just the general idea of what it's doing. It's delegating a piece of this information and letting the subagent go and do its things. On the right side, we'll dig in a little bit to the structure. So right off the bat, you see the name. This is just the name of your subagent. This is useful for when you want to invoke it explicitly, but also a lot of times we want things to be invoked implicitly. And that's where this piece comes in. The description is actually really important. And I find in my workflows, having a really solid description is part of the best way to get the most out of your subagents. A very simple description might not give your main agent enough ideas of what to hand off, how to hand off, or really when your subagent is useful. And so that's a really key piece to get a good implicit invocation of subagents. Finally, the next one, tools. Not every subagent needs every tool. How many of you use MCP servers in your day-to-day workflows? Quite a few. MCP servers are known to have so many tools. Our Google Workspace MCP has more than 50. And models don't always need all those tools all the time. So what's really special about subagents is you can create a very select sublist of tools. With Codebase Investigator, we didn't want the model to go mutate your files. We didn't want it to go write to files it didn't need to. And so the list of tools is completely read tools. And so that's the purpose of that. We can talk a little bit about model. This is just picking the right model for the task. Maybe you just need a very quick, cheap, small size model to go do something. Choose Flash Lite. Maybe you need something that's really good at exploring the code base and making things make sense. Use Pro. So that's the top part. There's some more pieces there, and we can get a little more complicated. I really like a feature, it's not shown here, is you can inline MCP servers. The really cool thing about this is by inlining the MCP servers, they're isolated to this subagent. So your main agent doesn't even know about them. You've created a very specialized subagent that has access to all of those tools, all 60 plus of those tools, and your main agent doesn't have to suffer the context rot. Right below the front matter, it's just markdown again. This is your system instructions. What is your agent all about? What's its specialized intent? Here, we're talking about an execution protocol, but this is your persona, the things you want it to do, the things you don't want it to do. So let's ground this back into the demo example. So John created this agent skill. I don't know if you noticed in the demo, but in the demo, there's a point where there was a failure. There was a validation issue, and it recovered, and it did fine. That's what the model does well. It recovers from its failures. However, each one of those failures has a compounding effect on longer-term tasks. By putting this into a subagent, John gets the best of his mermaid skill, of all of his exploration tasks, and putting it all together. So let's drop back down into the demo. So we'll walk through this. We'll walk through this. And notice right away, this is a brand new session. So we're not getting the same context from before. So right here, John wants to learn more about subagent delegation. We're going to keep it the same thing just to show the one-to-one. But take a look how he does it. The code is located, so he's giving some background for what he wants to know about. This is the same natural language he used before. However, there's some new syntax here. We created the architect visualizer subagent, off screen, but it was created. You can use these with @ commands or @ syntax, By doing this, you've told the main agent, hey, I want you to explicitly invoke this. I have a good description, but I want it explicitly invoked. So right away, the main agent is grounding itself in some truth. The subagent actually had very explicit instructions for knowledge context, like give me a good idea of what you want, and then I can take it from there. So it does that, creates that handoff, and then off the subagent goes. Immediately from our system prompt, it knows that it needs to go activate that mermaid skill. It activates it, and then it continues to explore. It's trying to build that same context and that knowledge graph that it had from the previous one. It's considering all of these things, and then it's going to go through that same process to create the mermaid diagram, create the right files, and then it's going to validate them. And after it does this, something that's really interesting in this subagent that we wrote is that we made it a big emphasis for accuracy. We want it to double check things, because we don't want a diagram that's kind of hallucinating. And so you'll see it's going to go do some more reads, making sure that everything in the diagram is correct. And this is totally fine, because all of these tool calls, all of this is going to be isolated in this context. It's not going to be brought back to the main agent. But as soon as it's happy with where it's at, it's able to see the image, it comes back and brings it back to the main agent. It brings this ASCII diagram and the locations for where those things are located. So same thing, we have a mermaid file, we have a PNG file, and the main agent also has a good text indicator of what these things are. So let's move on. Okay, so where are we at in the demo? We created that special subagent to basically capture all of John's workflow and isolate that expertise. It's a super nice workflow, and it was very organically created. And this is a lot of how our creations work today. One of us on the team finds something that we think is really helpful, we build a skill around it, or maybe we build a hook around it. And then we realize that there's other things that need to be added. Now, this is all on his local machine, but it's not shared with anyone. But the best part of these tools is not just to build them for yourself, it's to get out of those silos. Because your teammates also need these things, and your company also needs them. And you don't even realize how many people are doing the same thing sometimes. And so this is where step 4 comes in. We want to package and share this workflow, because this is where the real unlock comes from. So let's take a look at this. This is the anatomy of an extension. Has anyone in this room ever had a workflow that they found really useful and wanted to share it with people? Yeah? Prompts, it could be anything. Yeah. Building workflows into a single shareable package is basically all an extension is about. So what are they? Under the hood, it's just a standard directory, right? It looks like a list of subdirectories and some files. And really, it's as simple as that. An extension, the only thing it really needs is a directory, a manifest file, which is the Gemini extensions JSON you see, and then whatever you want to share with whoever your audience is. So we'll go through the customizations real quick. Some of these we've talked about, some of these people have heard about. The manifest is where all the metadata lives. The only few things that you need in there is the name of the extension and maybe a version number. Everything else is up to you. You can configure MCP servers. You can configure, what else is there? You can configure commands and hooks and all of these things. Then you have context. When you have an extension, you know how to use it as the author, but it's useful for the agent to also know what to do with those tools that you're providing it. So these are the context files that you've seen before. Gemini MD files, Claude MD files, Agents MD files. These are the files that we call context. Agents, these are your subagent files that we looked at. Skills and hooks. Hooks are super cool. Hooks are these configurable points in the agent lifecycle where you can go in and really do whatever you need. Something that we really use at Google internally when we need to unlock some new capabilities. And then commands and MCP servers. So if you take a look, I've highlighted oh no. Sorry guys. You take a look, I've highlighted a few. So the agents and the skills are things that we've already built during this session, during the demo. There's a new one there. I also added the extension because we need it. And then we add the Gemini MD, which is the context piece. So let's go through it and see what it looks like. So John wants to create this extension, but nobody likes to dig through documentation, or at least I don't. And so this is where some of the built-in subagents really come into play. All John has to do is figure out what he wants to do, use the @invocation to ask the CLI help agent and get started. So here, we're mentioning that we want to build an extension with an agent skill, with a subagent, and we're gonna add a context file just to make it a little bit more useful. From the invocation, it knows I'm gonna go call the CLI help agent. And from here, the CLI help agent has specialized tools. It can go dig into the documentation for you, so you don't have to. And this is the cool thing about the expertise of the subagent. It goes and does these things, doesn't pollute the main context, comes back with the exact structure of the manifest and everything else. So no more parsing and no more copy pasting documentation you find online into your terminal. It just knows it. So cool, it knows exactly where to start. And from there, something really cool happens. It knew what we wanted to do, and so it used its built-in Ask User tool to create this really cool UX experience. What extension do you want to build? So we're going to build an architecture visualizer extension. And what skills do we have? Well, we have the mermaid skill, and we have our subagent that we built. It saw that, it read the files, and so it even lets you know, like, hey, the available skills that we have, there they are. And the context piece. When do we want to use these things? Or how do we want to use them even? So right here, John can say, hey, I have this skill, but I want my subagent to use it. So whenever you're working with diagramming or architecture and visualizing it, I want you to call that subagent. This is just a small context piece that gets added to the main agent's prompt. That way, it knows when to use it. And here, you're not really doing anything crazy. It's just natural language. And from there, you're good to go. So yeah, same thing here. And then review. All looks good. We hit enter, and then off it goes. So it's going to read those files that we already had, and it's going to move them over using the built-in tools that you had. Create the extension. There's that manifest JSON. You don't have to worry about what it looks like. The agent knew from the CLI help agent. Here's that context file from the natural language. It knows the pieces of the subagent, like known context. Looks pretty good. And these are the things that help it know when to call it. We got it done, and that's it. And that's all it took to create an extension. Of course, extensions are not static. Like all tooling that we have in the AI space, today it's something, tomorrow it's something completely different. And so it's more about getting it there, getting it out into the hands of the people at your company or your colleagues, and continuing to iterate on it. Okay, so we created it. As you can see, it was created in the local workspace. But how do my teammates get it? How do John's teammates get it? Well, there's a few different ways to do this, and it depends on what your use cases are. One, publish it publicly. Add it to a public Git repo. And we do this all the time. Especially at Google, there's tons of extensions that we create, and they're available publicly to use. So anyone can use it. Now, that's really important, but also secure distribution. Maybe you have very sensitive prompts or hooks or MCP servers for your company, and we don't want to share that with just everyone. And so a private repo. It could be a local shared folder. This keeps your sensitive prompts safe and secure. For example, we do this at Google all the time. We have internal teams that build extensions that unlock capabilities for them and share across broadly. And so teams will work on these extensions, and then anyone at Google they'll look at it and say, hey, that's something that I can use. Why not install it? And that brings to the next point. Tools are great, but when they're hard to install and hard to use, you're not likely to use them. That's where extensions are really powerful. They're super simple to install. As you can see on the right, just a simple command. And this just shows how to install them. It could be from a repo, it could be from a shared location. But it's just as easy to manage them in the session. You can install them, disable them, uninstall them completely. And so maybe you have a plethora of extensions that you downloaded. You don't have to have them on all the time. You can always move them around as needed. Cool, let's take a look at where we are on the roadmap. Awesome, so we've basically gone through the whole thing. We started out with just our foundational tools, got an idea of what the code base looked like, investigated it, and then we found a way to create a really neat diagram, a diagram that we can use in design documentation, on websites, whatever it could be. And then finally, we supercharged it even further by using a subagent. Now, we're ready to package it and ship it off. But John's not the only one building. What if you want to build something and leverage the community that already exists and your favorite companies that have already created these extensions? That brings us to the next point. The extensions gallery. So building private, secure tools for your immediate team is incredibly powerful. But we also want you to benefit from the collective intelligence of the whole community. So there's hundreds of extensions out there, as you can see, and some of these are built by Googlers. So BigQuery, Google Workspace is one. They're also contributed from the developer community. Lots of companies develop their own extensions to make it easier to work with their products. So one great example of this is actually, I mentioned Google Workspace. One of my favorite extensions, and a big favorite for the CLI team as well. It helps us, keep track of chats, documents, anything in our workspace that we need in our agent. So context is really easy to grab. Everything you can do to stay where you're productive is what I think is really helpful and powerful. I'm not going and copying and pasting things as much because I can just get it right in my agent. But yeah, that's the incredible part about the complex system. And it's not like there's anything special about these pieces. We talked about all the surfaces. And as you can see, each one of these extensions are using the same things we just talked about. There's the same skills, the same hooks, the same subagents. And so it's about how you are able to multiply them and use them in an effective way. And then, of course, sharing them.